What's up, RotoGrinders? Merry Christmas Eve, Happy Holidays, Happy Hanukkah. We got NFL pre-lock a day early. We got some things to do tomorrow, a few commitments with the family, but that doesn't mean we're not going to be bringing you important analysis for the Christmas Day slate. I'm your host today, TJ Zwarych, joined by the GPP final takes man himself. I'm assuming either a very exciting or disappointing week for best ball. Erik Beimfor, how you going? How you doing?
Yeah. Week 16 is maybe the most emotional week if you come from the best ball, the season-long space. It's like, of course, you want to win the championship. You want to win all the money, right? In week 17, that's the end goal. But you feel like you accomplished your goals if you just get there to the championship. You know what I mean? If you make it, it's like, all right, I'll roll. I'll however the chips fall, we're all good. But luckily, we do have DFS, still to play that can help offset that. I've actually, TJ, we had a rough stretch. The first 4 to 6 weeks of this NFL season were one of the best I've ever had. It was going great, and then, as you know, as a DFS player, we hit the bot every week. We hit the injuries. We hit the flag plants, guys scoring 0 or negative. We hit every possible landmine. We bounced back the last couple of weeks. Another good week this week. So I'm excited to get into I love the holiday slates, man. I love the Christmas NBA. I love now that we get a bunch of these fun slates for NFL. Ton of fun. So I'm excited.
Couldn't agree more. Love the Christmas Day NBA. And so now that we're getting some NFL as well, that just absolutely adds to it. I've had a tough NFL season this year. I was going on 3 straight seasons with 6-figure wins. Haven't hit one yet this year. Had a good night for Showdown last night. Made a big profit, but it was almost even bigger. These damn Packers, the second straight Showdown slate, they have the game fully in the bag, and they throw a deep ball that drops me like $10,000, and I'm like, no! But it was very close to a huge day. Still a very good day. Ready to carry that on into the Christmas slate. We got 2 games, and they're fun ones. We got 2 really good matchups here. I think one of them, from a DFS standpoint, is a little bit more exciting than the other one, but we have Ravens and Houston. We have Pittsburgh and Kansas City. What's your initial thoughts on this slate?
Well, my initial thoughts is Baltimore-Houston certainly stands out, and it has stood out all year as a much more appealing game between these two. However, I'm pretty interested in maybe a little bit more contrarian approach to this game. We obviously had the brutal Tank Dell injury last week, which is a huge piece of this slate, but not just because of the potential plays that it might open up on the Texans side of things. The Texans just haven't been very good, man, for a long time. So we're getting, a lackluster Texans offense, but specifically against a really improving Ravens defense since week 10. So they played the Bengals in week 10. From weeks 10 to week 16, the Ravens are number 1 in all of the NFL in EPA per dropback on defense, which is, if you remember, for the first 8-10 weeks of the season, we were like, all right, who's Baltimore playing? Because Baltimore's going to score, and the opposing passing games were just destroying this defense, and they've really, really improved. I can't say for sure if that's a bit of a mirage or, small sample variance, but it's also possible that it's very real. On the flip side, somehow Patrick Mahomes gets high ankle sprains and becomes better for fantasy. I don't really get it. Maybe it's Hollywood back. Maybe it's Worthy improving. But
he's the classic meme where it's just like, oh, call an ambulance, but not for me. That's Patrick Mahomes anytime he's hurt.
For his fantasy opponents, right? That's what it is. Yeah, don't call an ambulance for him while he's rolling around on the sideline with a high ankle sprain. Call an ambulance because he's finally about to start scoring 25 fantasy points.
Yeah, break out the 20-yard runs.
yeah. He runs for a touchdown in the first quarter or whatever last week. Just what a hilarious run out. But they're getting healthier on offense. Mahomes is looking a little bit better. Hollywood's back. Worthy's there. They have Nuke. They have Pacheco back. Pittsburgh should be getting George Pickens back. I think the offense has a little more, at least fantasy juice with Russell Wilson. Fields rushing is removed, and they're a much better passing team now with Russell Wilson. You get Pickens back, man. You got Hollywood back. That first game felt like oh man, like a month ago, we were, no, I'm not really that interested in that one. Now I think it has a little more appeal, and I'm a little bit more worried about the Texans side of things than I would have been. Again, same thing a month ago or so. I think the slate's really kind of been shaken up in the last couple of weeks.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. No Tank Dell. I don't know. Like, are we gonna get? I assume no Deontay Johnson yet for Houston.
Would be hilarious.
And
Would
some
be
revenge right
the
in his first.
weirdest revenge of all time.
If he's playing, like I would throw him in, and he gets thrown into the pool. I would throw him in a lineup specifically for revenge.
Just one, just
Yeah.
to see, right, just once, just to see how it feels. Well, like if he plays and he's active, he's obviously not going to run like full routes, right? But it seems like it would be stupid to me to activate him and not have him playing any kind of a role, because he's not going to play special teams. And they're already really thin at wide receiver, right? We're going to talk about some nasty Texans wide receivers here today. So if you're really that thin and this guy's not going to play special teams late in the year, like I don't see why you would activate him if you weren't going to use him at all. So I think he is a guy that we can't really speak to today that well. If he is active, I'm not going to play him in, like, you know, if I'm playing small fields, I don't think you got to get that cute. But you want to win the millie and like luck box a Deontay Johnson touchdown or something, I don't think it's that crazy in the really big field, you know, lotto type stuff.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. It's anytime we get a 2-game slate, I'm way more willing to just try things that I know maybe aren't quote unquote smarts, but have a chance that if they, on the small likelihood that they hit, you could get a big edge. So I'm in for that as well. We'll start going position by position here, and then we'll take questions. I'll go to the RotoGrinders live stream Discord chat for questions first. Then I will go to the YouTube chat. YouTube, smash that like button. If you have questions, admittedly, if you want to go in the RotoGrinders Discord throughout the day, tag myself. I don't want to maybe take your shots on any of the experts on the RotoGrinders Discord today. You might have a very good chance of getting an answer. I know for myself, I'll be able to answer you today. Tomorrow, probably not. And so if you have any questions for the slate, even if you're not watching us live right now, feel free to hit us up in the RotoGrinders Discord. I know I'll be able to answer it today. Just make sure you tag me, because otherwise I probably won't see it. Today I'll be able to answer questions throughout the day. Tomorrow, not so much. We'll go position by position, covering FanDuel and DraftKings. YouTube, smash the like button. Let's start out at the quarterback spot. We don't have initial ownership projections in yet. I know they'll be coming later this afternoon. Just waiting on a few more bits of news, like probably if Deontay Johnson going to be dressing and various injury things. But as it stands right now, I would have to assume, with all those colorful dots and the highest projection by a fairly wide margin, Lamar Jackson's going to be the chalk.
For sure. And I think he should be. It's I actually think, like you said, these two games are kind of fun for fantasy, and yet the quarterbacks are not really that exciting. The issue that I struggle with in terms of like fading Lamar in this spot is, like, you're looking at FanDuel, but even DraftKings, it's a little bit better in terms of the savings that you get, but you're really not getting much savings, like especially to Mahomes. We could talk ourselves into, Mahomes is back, right? The ankle injury, it's angry Mahomes now, I guess, but they do need. I guess I should have probably said this. The Chiefs really need / want to win this game. They are like 80-ish% to get the bye, but they need to win at least one of these next two games. And so what I imagine Mahomes would like to do, or at least Andy Reid might like to do, is win this one so that we can rest up, Kelsey, Mahomes. Chris Jones is hurt, right? Their offensive line is hurt. They definitely want to win. So they're going to go all out. But the problem is we just aren't getting any real savings, like 1,500 on DraftKings, 1,100 on FanDuel. Like, the spot is pretty darn good for Lamar. If this were a more difficult spot for him as a passer, maybe we could talk ourselves into it. I think if you want to, like flip the build or something, go down to a Russ and really like, okay, that's where I can get a whole bunch of savings and use that to get Derrick Henry, right? Or get some of these expensive spend ups, Nico Collins. I think that can make some sense, but it's really, really hard not to just take the Lamar stuff. And like I said, I focus a lot more on the smaller field type contests where I'm really looking only for like 1 or 2 leverage points on these short slates, and the quarterback one is a little bit more difficult for me to pull that trigger on this slate.
Couldn't agree more. Lamar Jackson he's got so much of a higher upside than the rest of these guys because he's more likely than any of the four to throw 3, 4, 5 touchdowns.
Yep.
And he's the most likely by far to rush for 50, 60, 70 yards. So the routes for him to get there are just so much better than everybody else. We've seen in close games and in blowouts, he'll just keep throwing the ball and rack up the touchdown passes. So Lamar Jackson is definitely the route I'm going. I'm not sure how many lineups I'm going to play yet. I know you're a single entry guy, so that definitely makes it tougher to get off of Lamar. But I'm thinking if I go my typical like 20 entry max route, it's probably still going to be like single entry Lamar. If I do some kind of cash game Lamar, 15 of the 20 entry maxes is going to be Lamar because we have a surprising amount of value for the 2-game slate. It's not that hard to fit the studs in.
It's actually kind of easy. This morning I was playing around with some builds, and I mean so again on DraftKings, Nico Collins is the only expensive wide receiver. Zay Flowers is the second most expensive wide receiver at 6,400. They're the only 2 wide receivers above 6K on the whole slate. So if I'm going to spend down, right, I want to be able to go up and get some stuff that the Lamar teams are not going up to get. But then you have the difficult thing is like, yeah, but like it's a 2v2. What you really want it to be on a slate when you're like fading this chalky expensive guy is like completely flip the build, right? Everybody else is playing these cheap, Jalen Cokers, Malik Washingtons, right? Everybody's playing those guys, and you flip it, and now you got Jamar Chase and you got Justin Jefferson. Like that's the ideal. We just don't have access to that. Like you can still play Nico Collins with Lamar Jackson if you want. A lot of people are going to do that. So it's very difficult to find, this kind of form of leverage. I think it's probably the Derrick Henry thing, but this is, Derrick Henry can do it in any game. And I would be stunned if Justice Hill plays. Very gnarly concussion from him just a few days ago. So I don't imagine that he's going to play. So that does make Derrick Henry more appealing. Theoretically, a little bit more pass catching upside and just more snap share and all that good stuff. But it's not a great matchup for Derrick Henry either. So Lamar can technically get there on a 2-game slate with Derrick Henry. There's going to be Lamar and Derrick Henry teams. And so I just really find the path away from Lamar difficult. It's probably just that first game goes nuts, right? Russ happens to throw for 304 and he just straight up beats Lamar from a raw points perspective. Mahomes was fine last week, but dude, I mean, what did we get? 24 points. Lamar scores 24 points in his sleep, especially against the Texans. I think I would probably do the Russ thing, actually. I'm assuming George Pickens is in, to be clear. I don't want to be rolling Russ out there throwing to Scotty Miller and stuff. But if George Pickens is in, my current other option for me is to go all the way down to the Russ stack, maybe get Henry, get Nico, get the studs in there. But then you still got to find a way to be different because it's not like Russ is going to be 0% and everybody's going to do the same thing that you're doing on their Russ teams. So how do you get a little funky from there?
Yeah, that was going to be my next question. Who would be your top choice if you are going the fade Lamar route? And I think Russell Wilson would be my favorite as well, assuming that George Pickens plays.
Yeah,
I was thinking the route, looking at some builds where, hey, maybe I go CJ Stroud, stack him up with 3 of his receivers, and I am still looking at this possibility, especially on a 2-game slate. Play Collins, Woods, and Mechie all together. Run Derrick Henry on the other side, and just hope Henry soaks up all the points for Baltimore. Right. But even when you run that type of build, you still kind of got to look at it and go, okay, well, where do I spend all of my money? What if I'm not paying up for Lamar? Where am I spending all my money? And so that's why I definitely think from a cash game perspective on both sites, FanDuel and DraftKings, whether you're playing cash or just looking at a single entry in a small field and thinking, I want to play it as optimal as possible, it's a team jam them in week. You're playing Lamar Jackson, Derrick Henry, and Nico Collins, and then you figure the rest of it out.
Yeah, and I think that's the biggest issue with fading Lamar is, like you said, okay, all right, I decide I'm going to fade Lamar. I'm going to play the Stroud thing. Well, other than Nico Collins, none of the Texans are expensive because there's no Tank Dell, right? Dalton Schultz finally had a good game. We'll obviously get to him at tight end, but where do we, right? We need to score the most raw points. We need to, like, it's not just does Lamar fail or does Henry fail or does whoever fail. It's like we still have to outscore the other team, right? They're not going to be 100% owned. I still have to score the most points. And like, it's CJ Stroud with Nico, Tank, or even Diggs at the beginning of the season. We're not really scoring that many raw, that like other than a couple games of Nico and a couple games of one game of Tank last week and a couple games of Diggs. We're not. So are there lesser? So is Robert Woods just gonna step right? Is like I tagged Xavier Hutchinson, but that's just kind of like a right. You do the team jam him in. I got to pick a punt somewhere type situation. It's just tricky. There is no spend up in the first game, right? So if I'm not playing Lamar, if I want to, move to the first game, Pittsburgh and Kansas City, well, I still have all this salary, right? It's like there's nothing wrong with leaving salary on the table, of course, but I do still want to score the most raw points. And like, how many times is Robert Woods outscoring Zay Flowers or Nico Collins or Derrick Henry or whatever? It's like it's a really thin bet.
Yeah, I agree 100%. If you are playing a lot of stuff in a large field, I do think there definitely is, depending on the type of ownership that comes in. I'm assuming we're going to get 50+% owned Lamar Jackson in this spot, like at least 40, but probably above 50. If Mahomes does come low owned because people are going, hey, I want to spend all the way down or I want to spend all the way up, there are ways to utilize that salary, just going Mahomes, Worthy, Kelsey, Hollywood, Hopkins. Like there are stacking routes there where even though the matchup isn't very good, maybe the end of the season, like you said, Kansas City just wants to sew this one up so that they can coast and rest guys the rest of the way. And so maybe Andy Reid opens up that playbook a little bit and we see Kansas City revert back to how Kansas City used to look. Then all of a sudden there are paths to that winning a GPP, I think.
Definitely.
But
I think I will say I didn't maybe give it as much credit because I do just like you said, it's just the structural, like, more game theory elements around Russ. Just taking, like, if we're going to get away from Lamar, let's take as much savings as we can and jam as much upside. Like, I'm basically saying I don't want to play the Texans wide receivers, right? Like I want to play George Pickens. Maybe I play Freiermuth or Jalen Warren or something like that with Russ, but I don't want to play Xavier Hutchinson. I don't want to play Robert Woods. What do I do to get away from those guys? I think it's go down to Russ, but then you can play Worthy in that team. You can play Hollywood or whoever from the Chiefs because you have a ton of money. And I think that they are all good options. I struggle with the Mahomes side of it, but I think everyone's going to, right? They're going to think the same. If I'm going to get away from Lamar, why would I save 1,100 or 1,500 when I can save 2,500, right? Down to Russ. But if you get right, if you just get a mediocre Lamar game, 24, whatever, something like that, right? He projects for 21. If you get his projection and Mahomes exceeds his projection, does what he does last week, 23, 24, like, okay, now we're talking, right? Now we're talking Derrick Henry's probably in the optimal, and maybe the Mahomes double with Pickens bring back is really the optimal. So there's a path. It's just it's a struggle, right? It's a tough one because that's not factoring in the matchup type stuff, which is where we're just talking a lot of theoreticals. The Pittsburgh and Kansas City defenses are both pretty good, so that also hurts their odds of really exceeding projection. But nonetheless, it's viable. And to be clear, Stroud is last. I'm not even considering CJ Stroud, which is kind of crazy. I would put Lamar, Russ, and then Mahomes in that order for me.
Yeah, Stroud would be last for me as well. I think if I'm playing enough lineups, I probably do get a couple full Stroud stacks just in case, where I basically try and game stack that full game in its entirety, paying up for Zay Flowers, paying up for Derrick Henry, and then just also playing the cheap wide receivers with Nico Collins on the CJ Stroud side, and just hope they get down 21 early. And they're all Derrick Henry, and then Stroud miraculously pulls a rabbit out of a hat. But again, that's just very large field stuff, hoping that he's going to be very low owned and that game goes out of control and they can kind of keep it a little bit close. Let's go to the running back position. And I think this is where we get to switch into GPP final takes mode a little bit, because Derrick Henry is going to be very chalky, I think, Although our early projections have Joe Mixon projected above Derrick Henry. And so if that's the same case where it was Mixon and Henry were on these short slates together just the last week, and if Mixon comes in higher owned than Henry, that'll be incredibly exciting for me because I'm currently thinking I'm going to hit the lock button on Derrick Henry.
Yeah, that's how I'm feeling too. Like, even though we talked about the Lamar thing, JB Yankees even says in the chat, like, why not start with Lamar, Henry, and like soak up all of that Ravens stuff. And I know Joe Mixon's had a really good season. This is one of, if not the toughest matchup in the entire league for a running back. He does share some time. He'll catch a few passes, but he comes out on some passing downs. They haven't been very good in the run game, and I don't really foresee the Ravens being the spot where they kind of turn it back around. No Tank, so the scoring expectation is a little bit lower too, which he's going to need touchdowns. On the flip side, Derrick Henry, so we still have Justice Hill in these very, like you said, these very early projections. I would be stunned if Justice Hill plays. Guys don't play with a week of rest off of a concussion, certainly not ones that was as bad as what Justice had. So I just think, like, you might actually get a few catches from, right? We got the one long screen last week. We might get a few catches from Derrick Henry. To me, I understand the projections. These are just early baseline projections, not adjusted just yet. If Mixon's even like coming close to Henry's ownership, it's just a slam dunk for me. I don't think that they should be close. I think Henry should be significantly higher owned than Mixon.
I agree. Couldn't agree more. I hope so badly they come in close, and I will go X button Mixon and 100% Henry.
Yep.
And 100% Nico Collins. Like, that's kind of how I would go about it. Is those are the two guys I would take my big stands on, and then just go completely without Mixon in this spot. Even in a cash game setting, I understand. Like, if you want to jam in all four of those guys, JB Yankees 27 asked that in chat. Why not play Jackson, Mixon, Henry, Collins, and go from there? You can. That's viable on the slate. There's enough cheap value that you can do it. I just think I prefer to be able to get a couple more mid-range players in there and fade Mixon in its entirely. Outside of those two, it's a crapshoot. It's an absolute crapshoot. Like, in a semi-close game, Kareem Hunt ended up out having more touches than Isaiah Pacheco last game. He's the one who got the touchdown. In this type of game script, I see you have Jaylen Warren tagged. He's probably the guy, running back, if you're picking a Pittsburgh one, despite the lower projection, that feels better for GPPs because no one has been able to run against the Chiefs all season long. And Jaylen Warren's the more likely guy to catch some passes. Justice Hill likely to be out. And if he is, that's where I kind of was talking, maybe we get in GPP final takes mode for the large field tournaments, because we haven't seen him all year long. But we know pre-injury, Keaton Mitchell was one of the fastest dynamic fantasy point per touch backs in all of football last year before he got hurt. I don't think that's crazy for a large field tournament.
No, I don't think it is either. So for anybody that, like, Keaton Mitchell hasn't even been active of late. When he first got activated off injured reserve, he was active. So they've been, obviously Derrick Henry and Justice Hill are active every game, and then they activated Keaton Mitchell as the third running back, and Rasheen Ali is their rookie 5th round, 6th round pick, and then he went to be a game day inactive. But then they were weird about it. Harbaugh was pretty weird about it. He was just basically like, we just like to get Keaton some rest. He had a bad knee injury last season, so I think that they're just being very cautious with him. What better spot to kind of not be so cautious anymore, right? No Justice. You don't want Derrick Henry playing every snap here down the stretch. Rasheen Ali's probably not ready for that responsibility. Like, even if it's just a few schemed up touches for Keaton Mitchell, like you said, he can break that for a 60-yard touchdown, even if he's not old. Old Keaton Mitchell ran a 4.2 or whatever. So, he runs a 4.35 now. I think he'll be all right, running away from the defense. He's in play for sure. You mentioned the GPP final takes. If we want to get into the really crappy players, and he's not a crappy player, it's just we have genuinely no idea what his role is going to be. But I would be pretty shocked without Justice if he doesn't get involved in some way, Keaton Mitchell, because Derrick Henry just is not that guy that plays every single snap. And so he has a lot of paths to usefulness, I think, and one path, which happens to be his best skill, to a big game, right? A big game is relative on this slate. Like, score me 13, and I'm like, oh, game over. I just won all the money. With Keaton Mitchell, we don't need the 25-point game. But I think he could catch a couple balls, and if you happen to luck your way into a touchdown, boom, man! Like, you just ship the slate, because, as you just mentioned, it's all timeshares and unappealing running backs elsewhere. I have Jaylen Warren tagged, but that is because we have to pick a second running back. We have to play at least 2 running backs. If Mitchell can match any of these Warrens, Najee's, Hunts, Pacheco's, whatever, I mean, it's just a total slam dunk, because now you can get up to, like you mentioned, the kind of mid-tier of wide receivers, the Worthies and Zays and Hollywoods of the world, which are just so much of a better bet than those cheap guys.
Is Patrick Ricard practicing this week? Because I thought I remembered him saying I thought I remembered something about him not playing last week, but if I Google his name, there's literally nothing. If I search tweets about Patrick Ricard, there's quite literally nothing there. But I thought I remembered hearing something about him not playing, and that advances Isaiah Likely because he gets some more snaps. And then Isaiah Likely ended up scoring the touchdown. But I see we have him in the early set of projections, and there's literally nothing if I search his name in Twitter. But I know maybe there was, I was looking at some of the DraftKings blurbs, and we don't have him in projections yet, but Ali is the other running back for Baltimore that's been healthy lately. Would he be somebody that, if Keaton Mitchell is active, would he be somebody that you would think of considering? And then if Keaton Mitchell is inactive, all of a sudden, is that somebody that you would maybe want to roster?
I think that's the big, if Keaton Mitchell is active, it's really hard for me to pull the trigger. I like Rasheen Ali. I think he might end up being an okay player. And he didn't, when they beat the doors off the Giants or whatever, he was playing like the whole fourth quarter. He actually looked kind of good. Granted, it was the Giants, and everybody looks good against them. If Keaton is active, it's just really hard to pull that trigger, because what you're really hoping for from this other guy is that not inherit the full Justice Hill role. Like, the full Justice Hill, if Justice Hill was playing on this slate, buddy, okay, now we're like, I would be playing Justice Hill on this slate. So that's why we're talking about these other running backs. Like, I think you can play double Ravens running back. I think you can play double Ravens running back with Lamar.
Yeah.
It's just the Keaton thing is tricky. I'm going to be looking a lot over the next 24 hours at if we can get anything. Harbaugh can be kind of coy with some of that stuff, so it's rough. But if we can get any indication on how like who's stepping into this, because there is a role here to be had by somebody, and I kind of want to play the guy that it is, but I also don't want to like you said, in Lotto or playing 20 or 150 teams or whatever, yeah, it's a little bit different. But for me, 1 to 3 teams, I don't want to just play into it and just to play into it, because without any information, I don't think you have to go that far. But Ali or Keaton. I would say I'm more excited about Keaton just because he kind of has that home run ability. But Rasheen Ali has, like, he stepped into pass game snaps, very few, but pass game snaps last week after Justice got his concussion. Rasheen Ali did play in that game after Justice went down. So it's definitely just very possible that he is next man up, and we're wish casting Keaton because he's a fun player. But if Rasheen Ali does step into that role, he also is very more so on DraftKings. I think all of this is more DraftKings focused, but one of these guys has a chance. I just don't have the slightest clue which one of them it's going to be.
It is tempting with, all of these team totals are within 6 points of each other. They're not that big differences, but the Ravens do feel like the one team that would be most likely to shatter their team total by 15
Correct.
points. And so it is tempting, especially if we hear nothing. We don't know who is active and inactive until they release the inactives list an hour and a half, hour before the game, whatever it is. Especially with that being the later game, it is so tempting to just run 20, 150, 10, 1, whatever you're doing, Baltimore onslaught lineups where you're saying, I'm going to play Lamar, I'm going to play Derrick Henry, I'm going to play Zay Flowers, I'm going to play one of the backup running backs, I'm going to play Mark Andrews, and I'm just going full Ravens. And then you just adapt and adjust based on that inactive list. Oh, Keaton Mitchell is active. I get a lot of him. Oh, he's not. Okay, I want to make sure I'm way overweight on Rasheen Ali now. Patrick Ricard's inactive. Okay, I'm going to bump up Isaiah Likely and get more of him than I did Mark Andrews. Whatever it is, just load up on that type of stack and then adjust based on when that inactive list comes out, because it's Christmas Day. If you have the time to look at that, not many other people are going to be keeping their eye on that as much as they would have. Like, a lot of people will, sure, but relative to how many are usually on main slate news, absolutely not.
Yeah, it just depends on how much they like their in-laws, right?
Yeah.
Or their family. How locked in are you at family Christmas, or are you
like doubling down? Hanukkah, the first day of Hanukkah starts on Christmas Day this year. And so that's like, it's it's a whole another group of people too that's taking that in too. It's not even like there's some people who are like, I'm not celebrating. There are still some people who aren't celebrating, but there's not as many who are like, I'm not celebrating, and so I get to lock in. The group is getting smaller.
Yeah, exactly. Most, right? We're very inclusive.
Religious game theory is what we're doing right now.
Yes, exactly. Religious game theory. But hey, also this is on Christmas Day. There's NBA. If there's real grinders out there, they got to deal with their family. Maybe the father-in-law, they don't get along that well, so you are grinding. But you got to look at NBA too, right? And we got NBA games every 2.5 hours all day long. So it is kind of interesting. The one thing I'll also add to that, like actually being serious for a second, is you can adjust as well to what goes on in the Kansas City and the Pittsburgh game, right? Like, you don't have Xavier Worthy and he has another big game. Okay, now my decisions, now I probably got to figure out something to where, what's a build that can win that didn't have Xavier Worthy, right? Like, I got to go to the top and the bottom at wide receiver. I got to maybe double tight end, something. I got to go to some structure that gives me a chance to still win these tournaments, or at least still cash. And I think those are the exact kind of swaps you should be looking for, right? Be looking for the Keaton Mitchell news, be looking for Patrick Ricard news. Nelson Aguilar is a huge one as well. He did not practice yesterday. Granted, these are all like walkthroughs on Mondays, but he was a DNP in their walkthrough. And so that's another, like, a big reason why Andrews and Likely are smashes is because of these ancillary guys that, like, don't really matter. We talked about this on Sunday with James Conner, and of course he got banged up. Hopefully he's okay. But like, when all the other running backs are hurt, it's like there's just nowhere else to go besides James Conner, besides Chuba Hubbard, right? When those other guys are out, everybody needs a breather from time to time, but like, you're in every personnel package now, right? And that's what's happening specifically for Likely, but Andrews too. Andrews got up to 76% of the snaps. He's been mostly like 50 to 60%, but that's because of Ricard. That's because of Aguilar. That's because of Likely. Well, if we remove those other guys, now you get a whole lot more routes for both Likely and Andrews. And I think we saw some of that hurt Zay a little bit. Now, I know he had 100 yards. But when you get the double tight end stuff out there on the field, like, Zay and Bateman are kind of the field stretchers, and then you open things up for Andrews and Likely underneath. They both score the touchdowns. So there's just a lot in that afternoon game to make sure we're on, and we're definitely not going to get the actives and inactives until an hour and a half before, but we may not, the coach speak type stuff and, athletic articles, beat writers coming out. So we may not get that till the first game's almost over, and then we can also kind of combine that with the results of the first game, right? Did some chalk totally bust and you faded them? Awesome, let's just play the best plays. Or did somebody hit in a big way that you don't have, and then it's time to figure out, all right, Keaton Mitchell or Rasheen Ali, come on down.
What does, and it very much depends on the position, but what does Mahomes or Pacheco or Hunt, or I see even Davis has Samaje Perine tagged all the way down there at the bottom. What does Xavier Worthy or DeAndre Hopkins have to do before you go, damn, I wish I played more of this early game?
That is a great question. That is always the toughest question. What I will say is, I prefer to swap if I'm questioning it. I prefer to swap rather than hold onto chalkier options, right? On a 2-game slate, like you have the running back projections up, right? There's only 3 guys that project for more than 10.6 points. And we could probably sit here and argue that the Pacheco projection might be a little toasty on him, and so maybe that puts Hunt up. But nonetheless, there's not many strong projections here. So if one of them, right, if Najee Harris scores 2 touchdowns, even if it's only 16 points, right? If you're thinking about it and you're like, well, it's only Mixon and Henry, that are my only possible running backs that can match that in the afternoon game. Well, time to start swapping, right? Time to, okay, maybe this is Keaton Mitchell because I need the low owned guy that hopefully breaks a long one and comes close to matching him. The wide receiver is a little trickier, but there's just not enough, even into reasonably exciting games. There's just not enough like fantasy points to go around that if one guy gets 20, like he's just like a lock for the, unless it's Derrick Henry or Lamar, they're just like a lock for the optimal when you score 20. So that's kind of my line, but I prefer to swap as opposed to hold when I'm considering it.
Last thing on running back, then we'll switch over to wide receiver. But on FanDuel, there's a $1,200 difference between Derrick Henry and Joe Mixon, not just $500. I personally still am as bullish on Henry over Mixon. Are you the same way?
Same, exact same. I just don't even think they're in the same stratosphere of a play this week. So it would need to be bigger price gap.
Yeah, that's the same page that I'm on as well. Wide receiver, I'm going to be trying to jam in as much Nico Collins as physically possible, like both sites. That's the guy that I want. Yes, sure, some of these ancillary wide receivers and Dalton Schultz, they'll get some targets for the Texans, but Nico Collins is going to be the guy. And we're like 5.5 point spread, not a huge one, but we are still expecting, with the injuries that Houston is going through, even at home, for Baltimore to run away with this one unless CJ Stroud pulls a rabbit out of his hat, and then it's probably Nico Collins going crazy, and that's why this game is close. The Hollywood Brown has been priced up. He barely played any snaps, but he was targeted for like all of them. And then Rashad Bateman has been finally, like, we've heard for so long, like, Rashad Bateman's always open. Why doesn't Lamar Jackson throw in the ball?
Lamar hates him.
Throwing him the ball now. He's becoming a red zone favorite. So, like, Rashad Bateman's looking pretty interesting now. Who are going to be your priorities at wide receiver?
For sure, Nico. I said at the top how this is certainly a tougher matchup. But I think that the volume in the game script can overcome, and the lack of Tank Dell can overcome. I genuinely believe, I don't know exactly where I would put him, but Nico is somewhere around the top 5 of real life wide receivers in the NFL. And so you have that kind of player without his other 2 best options at wide receiver next to him. Like, the opportunity plus talent is going to be so great that, like, look, if he fails, so be it. You got to take some stands. Like you said, I'm just probably going to lock Derrick Henry and lock Nico Collins and kind of deal with the results. He's for sure the number 1 priority for me. After him, we don't currently have George Pickens in the JB Yankees asking, would you be okay with George Pickens since it's a hamstring issue? That's who I was going to bring up next. He is my favorite tournament play on the slate, George Pickens.
17 minutes ago, got confirmation he's not even on the injury report.
Beautiful, even better. So I wasn't worried to the question about his hamstring. Maybe I should have been, but he's been out for 3 weeks. And he was a full practice yesterday and a full practice today. So I don't see why they would bring him back if they really thought he was going to get hurt. They're close to, they're close to a lock for the division. They're also pretty much a lock for the playoffs. But he's just that kind of guy, right? And when you think about the Chiefs' defense, Steve Spagnuolo is very much a pressure and man-to-man type defense. What does Russell Wilson do the best, right? Why was George Pickens looking a little bit better after Russ took over? Russ is a let's check it down or moonball it down the field. And Spags is going to bring the heat and make them throw. And there's one guy he's going to throw it to down the field, and that's George Pickens. So he has kind of this combination of floor from all the opportunity on this offense with the high upside of, if there's anyone besides Nico, I guess, that goes for 150 and 2, it's George Pickens on this slate to me. And he's too cheap because he's been injured.
Yep, I agree with that completely. I think if there's like, I'm definitely going to be overstacking the second game, but what I'm most likely to do is get just like maybe George Pickens and one Chief in most lineups, and then go with Baltimore and Houston loading up on them for the rest of it. Maybe that's Xavier Worthy. He's been getting so much more involved lately. He's considerate, like he's the one guy that's on the field for all the routes now. Whereas at the beginning of the year, he was just getting like specific Xavier Worthy stuff and then getting subbed off. Now he's the one guy on the field all the time. Maybe that starts changing a little bit as Hollywood Brown gets healthier. But even like we're seeing more trust in Xavier Worthy, and we're still seeing him have good games while getting so close to absolute monster games. So I think he's my favorite Chief. And then by far, George Pickens is my favorite Steeler. It's not even close. How do you rank Worthy, Flowers, and Pickens?
Oh, see, this is the tough part. Because if you do play Lamar and you play Henry, there's actually several appealing tight ends on the, like this is a loaded 2 games and there's like 6 tight ends that you can play. Well, it's pretty crazy
because it was the same as we just had a 2-game slate again with Mahomes and Baltimore and Houston all on it, right?
All 4 of these teams they played Saturday because they were setting them up for Christmas Day, so they didn't want to have anybody else on a 2-day rest or whatever.
Yeah, and so we just saw it where it's like, well, Travis Kelce and Noah Gray, I'll play them both. Isaiah Likely and Mark Andrews, I'll play them both. Dalton Schultz finally coming alive. Pat Freiermuth looked better before with Pickens out. I think I'm less interested in him now.
Agreed.
But still, if they're going to have to be throwing the ball because Kansas City scores some early touchdowns, they're not going to be able to run on Kansas City. All of a sudden, Freiermuth does look a little bit better. So many tight ends you can play. Double tight end is very, very viable. We will get more to tight end soon, but that's.
But that's important, right? To figuring out these wide receivers is it would be easy for me to just say, well, I could play all 4, right? But when you take salary into it, we just said we love Lamar. We just said we love Derrick Henry. You take salary in. A double tight end is maybe the easiest way to make all this other stuff work. Not only just like the salary savings, because we could do the Texans wide receivers too, but these tight ends are just like, they just project better. They're the best projections amongst the cheap options on this slate, especially now with Pickens back, right? And we don't really know what's up with the Texans wide receivers amongst those 3 guys. So we do have to kind of rack and stack these guys. I think I would say 4 tournaments, George Pickens is my number 1. I think I'm still going to go Zay Flowers over Xavier Worthy, but that one pains me. And I worry about, like, we have a pretty big difference between the Zay and Worthy projection. Maybe that will change when it gets massaged here a little bit. But
I did just switch to the blitz projections, which isn't standard supposed to do, but it has Pickens in. So I just want to give people a chance.
Yeah, that's perfect, because this can give us a little bit more of a glimpse. And it's not surprising that Cardi has a Worthy a little bit lighter and Zay a little bit stronger. And so I that's the hard part is, all right, so if Henry's going to get there, and we like Andrews and we like Likely and we like Bateman even on this slate, it's like, well, somebody's got to lose out. And I just don't have a ton of interest in the other Chiefs. And I definitely don't have interest in the other Steelers. So it's kind of that. It's like, I don't dislike Zay. It's just like when I have to rank them, I think I would rather lean into, like you said, if I'm going to play a Chief and a Steeler, let's do Worthy, Pickens, and then maybe I get away from Zay and just hope, you just hope Zay does this a lot, right? Like 7 for 70 and no touchdowns.
Yeah, and you go Lamar, Henry, Andrews, and Bateman.
And you get all the touchdowns that way. Yeah. Bateman beats or matches, right? And then Andrews are likely whatever tight end you play, they're cheaper and score a touchdown. Like, you don't need Zay. What you just need is Pickens and Worthy to have good games. So really, it's not even a Zay thing. It's more of a, do you feel like as convicted as we do about particularly Pickens, but Worthy or Bateman or one of these other guys?
Yeah, 100%. I'm already imagining it now of the lineups I'm going to be building, where they're Lamar stacks with Andrews and or Likely. With one of the lineups will have Zay, Pickens, and Pacheco. One will have Zay, Pickens, and Hunt. One will have Worthy, Pickens and Bateman. One will have, and just kind of
Yep.
like mixing and matching that way while still getting as much Lamar exposure as I possibly can. Let's talk cheap receivers and transition it into tight end at the same time, because I think that's a very important conversation based on these prices. We have to look at Mechie, Woods, and Hutchinson as the Houston guys. We have probably less interest in Mike Williams, Van Jefferson, Calvin Austin now that Pickens is back, but Austin maybe I still think is sneaky because his role doesn't really change whether or not Pickens plays. And then you have, I mean, what if Deontay Johnson gets thrown in there? You got to compare those guys with specifically Isaiah Likely, Noah Gray, Pat Fryermuth, Dalton Schultz, Mark Andrews, because they're in the same price range as the cheap receivers. And like, I'd way rather play Andrews, Schultz, and I even think Likely over most of these cheap receivers. Fryermuth is the one that I think I would go Mechie over Fryermuth.
I think so too. Yeah, I think that's where I would draw the line. I agree that all of the tight ends besides Fryermuth are better than the punt wide receivers.
Yeah.
And I think, I think Likely is actually quite a bit better. I know that sounds funny, and he did only have three targets last week, but what did they did not throw that many pass attempts. Let me just double check. Yeah, so he had 3 targets on 23 Lamar pass attempts. So the 3 targets doesn't sound great, but when you factor in the fact that they never threw the ball, it looks a little better. If we get a little more pass game overall work from the Ravens, I think that number grows. The same thing from Mark Andrews. Mark Andrews had 6 targets on 23 pass attempts last week. Combine those two guys. Like, I'm kind of into, we talk about ways to leave Zay out so we can get some of these other wide receivers, is like Andrews and Likely, right? Like Lamar, Henry, Andrews, Likely. Like, I could even leave Bateman out of that one if I wanted. I got my 4 Ravens. I can get my wide receivers from the other, right? Not how do you get the Nikos? I don't know if this works price-wise, right? But
well, how many times over the last 3 years have we seen Lamar have a huge game with 0 wide receivers? You can go Lamar, Henry, one of the backup running backs, Likely and Andrews, and spend up for Collins, probably Pickens and Worthy, and make it work.
Get they score 35 or 40, right? That's your hope, is they score 40 in this game, and you get all the touchdown because they don't go to any of the it doesn't go to any of the wide receivers. Lamar runs one, he throws one to he throws a screen to Keaton for a touchdown, right? And then Andrews and Likely, just like last week, Andrews and Likely both get one. It happens a lot more with them than with the other teams, and so I think that's one of my favorite paths. I will say, I'm just pulling quickly up the snap counts. I mean, Dalton Schultz is definitely a real play here. So I don't want to discredit him. He's very boring. Okay. Dalton Schultz, like, is a real life player, but we get this. Remember when he was on the Cowboys, and then it became Jake Ferguson, and then it became Luke Schoonmaker for a little bit. But this is what Dalton Schultz does. He's not a special real life NFL player. But when everybody else gets wiped out and he's the last guy standing and they have to throw, which they will today, we get what we got last week sometimes. 8 targets, 45 yards. You hope for a touchdown, but at 4,100 on DraftKings, like, okay, I got to spend not even 1,000 more for him than for one of the wide receivers on the same team as him, right? He projects for more points. He projects for more targets. He's going to be on the field for every snap, essentially. It's just really hard to click on these wide receivers. I do think that Xavier Hutchinson is at least interesting. He played he tied with Robert Woods for the second most snaps on the Texans last week. Tank was 4th because he obviously got hurt fairly early in that game. So he's not an exciting player, but I think of that like slot, the PPR, merchant, right? The guy that comes in and like, okay, Stroud just threw 45 attempts and Xavier Hutchinson had 8 targets, on the slate, where, like, again, it's kind of betting on some really lucky variance. I think that he could emerge as that guy. It's just that he does have to beat like 5 tight ends that all look pretty good. So I put the tight ends above all these guys, but then I would put Hutchinson, and I think I might even put Calvin Austin, like you mentioned, in Russ stacks or something. If I needed a punt, I think Calvin Austin is appealing just to get that potential, 50-yard touchdown, which is all that he can really do. But like you said, his role doesn't change based on really who's in there or not.
Yeah, that's the same page that I'm on. Guys on the receiving, like Austin and even DeAndre Hopkins and Hollywood Brown, more so on DraftKings and FanDuel. I think he's playable on DraftKings, assuming he gets his snap count up this week. And on FanDuel, he's a bit too pricey. They were proactive with getting him up there, but 4,500 is reasonable on DraftKings.
Are you gonna play him? Are you gonna play some Hollywood or no?
Only with Mahomes.
Okay.
And so I think that's like Calvin Austin, maybe just only with maybe on a Lamar team, but definitely on a Russell Wilson team. And DeAndre Hopkins, Hollywood Brown, only with Mahomes. But then I think I would be perfectly fine playing Worthy without Mahomes. And I do think Collins, Worthy, Pickens is going to be the three guys that I'm more likely to go to. And then Zay Flowers as well, probably. But I'm going to be looking to spend up at receiver here as much as I can, which will likely mean I'll be underweight on Travis Kelce, which is scary. Yeah. I'll certainly have some Kelce lineups where I am playing those cheap wide receivers. Like if I'm do take a shot on a Stroud team or a Mahomes team or a Russell Wilson team, I'll have the salary, and so I'll probably try and play some Travis Kelce. But
I like the Hollywood Kelce pairing with Mahomes to just be like, okay, people are going to play Worthy, and I think he should be higher owned. Maybe you'll get a little Hunt or a little Pacheco, but Mahomes is not going to be that low owned, and so you just go completely off the board and you say, we're all wrong, right? Everybody's wrong about this slate, and Hollywood does take a step in his snaps, and maybe Kelce does get the magic back for what all it takes is one 8 for 80 and 2 game from Kelce or whatever, right? Like you just get that one game where Hollywood does, this is the week he gets more snaps, and this is the week where Kelce kind of turns back the clock. You pair it with Mahomes. Now Mahomes is the highest scorer, right? And then it's just easy. Then you just play Henry, you just play Nico or Mixon, whatever your flavor is. You just jam the good plays around them because nobody's going to build for that, right? Everybody's looking at it like, oh, Hollywood didn't really play that much. Kelce's washed. Look at all these other tight ends. And you just say, well, there's one scenario that dunks on all of that logic, and it's a Mahomes, Hollywood, Kelce stack.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I mean, when you look at the box score for Kelce, he's been terrible. But really,
it looks like Isaiah Likely's box score.
Yeah, but really, the only thing I care about is this one right here. And targets 8 last week, 6 the week before, 13 before that, 8 before that. He's still getting the opportunities; they just haven't flourished. Mm-hmm. And so Kelce, I do think, is still very interesting for GPPs. Final position, defense. We won't spend long here. It doesn't really matter who you go with. Pick whoever you want. Texans are the least viable by far because Lamar doesn't really turn it over. I think it's okay to X out the Texans, but they're probably going to be like 6% owned on a 2-game slate. Mm-hmm. So what if they return a kickoff for a touchdown and then they end up being viable? So defense, you can play whoever you want. If you can get to the Ravens in a optimal scenario, you're playing cash, you're trying to just score. All you care about is making money this week. It doesn't matter if it's first, you just want to cash. Then Ravens. You play the Ravens, absolutely. Chiefs are your second choice if you can't afford them. But Steelers, 2,800 against the Chiefs, I'm totally fine with that. Texans are the only one where it's like maybe you play the optimal lineup with the Texans defense. And if they happen to return a touchdown, a kick return for a touchdown, you're looking super pretty.
That's the thing is we're so bad at I mean anybody, like it's just really not possible to predict the defense scoring type stuff. It's like
it's kind of why so many people say like take it out of DFS because it's random, right? Mm-hmm. Like it's just luck.
There's skill to playing against your right like you're thinking about defense in a certain way and I'm thinking about it in a certain way. There's skill to us playing the mental part against each other, but there isn't so much skill in predicting who's going to score the most points. So you completely nailed it. The Texans defense is pretty clearly the worst to me on this slate. They do have a good pass rush, but they're more of a slightly above average defense, whereas the other three defenses are pretty good. I want to see what's up with the Chiefs with Chris Jones. He went down in their game on Saturday. He's a pretty big deal for them. He doesn't necessarily light up the box score, but he basically draws a double team on every play. He's one of the best defensive linemen in the NFL. If he's out, that would definitely and so that is the early game, so we will know. That would push me certainly even to more Ravens. I did tag the Ravens in lineup HQ specifically to like what you said, be like this is the best defense. This is the best defensive play. Setting aside game theory, right, and all that different stuff, this is the team that is really improving. It's also, I also wanted to just find a spot to be like, this defense has gotten a lot better. Like, I don't know where to put this. So let's put it with the defense. This defense has gotten a lot better. Their pass rush is really good, and the Texans cannot protect CJ Stroud at all. He looks wolf, man. Like, I can't believe we would get to a 2-game slate. If you would have said this to me over the summer, we're going to get to a 2-game slate. Russell Wilson is starting for the Pittsburgh Steelers. Patrick Mahomes has a high ankle sprain. And CJ Stroud is playing the Ravens, who are have given up passing yards all season. And you're not interested in CJ Stroud. I would have told you you're absolutely nuts, right? Like, that's silly. But he's played poorly, and they've played poorly on offense. The offensive line is a mess. So I want to get to Ravens if I can, but like you said, they're going to be the highest owned, and I got to make sure we're building teams. I like the Steelers a little bit. The Chiefs looked a lot better last week. I don't expect that the Steelers shut them down, but like, I don't know, man. Mahomes has a bum ankle, and he does a lot of crazy shit. Like, he's still running around, right, flinging it, getting rid of the ball and doing some crazy stuff. Anything can happen in Chiefs games if they have offensive line issues, multiple offensive line injuries. They already had to move a guard to left tackle. I don't know. I could see TJ Watt strip sack fumble, or Mahomes does a left-handed pass, right, trying to escape, and Minka picks it off or whatever. Like, I would rank them Ravens, Steelers, Chiefs, Texans for my defense.
I like that. And when you're talking about Stroud, it just reminds me of like just looking at last week's DFS. What do you mean we can play DK Metcalf, Deebo Samuel, Marvin Harrison Jr., Sam Laporta, Breece Hall, and have a ton of salary left over?
Yeah, and I can't even spend all my
like and so that's kind of what we're getting a little bit with CJ Stroud. We knew we were giving you at least a half hour of pre-lock content. We ended up giving you an hour. Smash that like button, subscribe, hit the notification bell. Tim and I will be back for an NBA show as well, breaking down the Christmas Day slate live an hour from now at 3 p.m. Eastern. We got a couple questions we'll go through. We'll say who we think is going to break the slate, and then we'll get out of here. And hope you all have a very happy start to the holidays. Carolina guy wants to know our favorite low-owned play in a FanDuel GPP. We don't really know who's going to be super low-owned yet because we don't have a set of ownership projections ready yet. And so feel free to, when we get our first set of ownership projections, feel free to hit me up in Discord, and I'll try and find that one for you. But who I would say is a player I'm guessing will be low-owned. This is just a pure guess. But because I think people will be worried about that hamstring injury, we both love some George Pickens.
Amen. I'm totally in on that. So I won't talk anymore about Pickens. Also, it wouldn't be a show with, especially with me, but with me and you diving into Xavier Hutchinson and Pat Freiermuth and Keaton Mitchell and Rasheen Ali if we didn't go a little long. But it's the holidays. We're feeling good. I'm gonna toss. My assumption is Mark Andrews is going to be higher owned, but they don't project that different. Whichever Ravens tight end is lower owned is what I'll pair them alongside George Pickens and say I think they're both incredible plays, Mark Andrews and Isaiah Likely. So whichever one comes in lower, I'm going to guess it's Isaiah Likely, but whichever one looks good.
Love that. And like you just mentioned, our really gross low-owned plays: Keaton Mitchell, Xavier Hutchinson because of the snaps, Mitchell because of the home run ability. Two guys that if you need some salary savings, you can get in there as well. Who is breaking the slate? Little 2-gamer. Like, look, the correct answer that I believe is actually going to happen, and it's how I'm building like most of my lineups, is pairing Derrick Henry, Lamar Jackson, and Nico Collins together. But even our favorite low-owned plays, I think that's kind of our favorite way to get different, win a GPP this week, is Pickens as a spend-up option, and then the Isaiah Likely's, the Hutchinsons, the Keaton Mitchells as a way to get incredibly different.
Yeah, that's definitely it. I keep gravitating to these tight ends. I think my flag plant will be double tight end, which is cheating a little bit, but I just think that's where the slate's going to be won. There's so many good tight ends we didn't even really talk about, because you can't talk about everybody over the course of an hour. But I think Noah Gray is completely viable. He's not necessarily my flag plant, but right there's 6 dudes that we can rotate through in double tight ends, Travis Kelce being my least favorite, which is kind of hilarious. We love double tight end on a 2-gamer, and I don't like Travis Kelce really, but all of these tight ends are awesome plays, and they're the best kind of salary savers. I'll go ahead and flag plant the double Ravens tight end.
I like that.
The double Ravens. So Andrews and Likely are both scoring touchdowns.
There you go. Here's the craziest thing that is going to win the the highest dollar of GPPs tomorrow. Lamar Jackson with double running backs and double tight end.
Yeah, no wide receivers.
Yeah. Maybe Bateman, but maybe no wide receivers, double tight ends, double running backs. I can't even know off the top of my head if it's $1 million contest tomorrow, but that is what's going to be winning the big GPPs. Thank you so much for tuning in, everybody. Like I said, I will be back with Tim at 3 p.m. today, breaking down the Christmas Day slate for NBA. Merry Christmas. Happy Hanukkah. Have a great holidays, whatever you're celebrating. If you're not celebrating, hopefully you can get some relaxation away from the world, get a little bit of an edge in DFS, paying more attention than everybody else. On behalf of myself and Erik, happy holidays. We'll see you next time. Good luck in DFS. Peace out.